What's up, everybody? Cinephile Mike here, and today I am joined by writer and director Sai to discuss his latest short film, I Am the Prize, screening at this year's HollyShorts Film Festival. Starring Russell Tovey, I Am the Prize follows Anthony Selvon, a charismatic self-help figure whose carefully crafted public image begins to unravel as uncomfortable truths about his personal life come to light. Sai, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So this is your third film. So Ganima and What Men Do for Love explored very different ideas. So what was it about I Am the Prize that made you say this was the next story that you wanted to tell?
It just felt very current at the moment, right? So, I mean, all of this stuff is happening at the same time. The manosphere, this kind of real pill community, it's just been growing, going over the years. I was aware of it when I was graduating from university, where a lot of people were starting to get into it. It was starting to come out of the woodwork. It was starting to be part of the public consciousness, especially around like young men. So that's when it first kind of sparked, the idea sparked in me where these guys aren't quite who they say they are. And they're really just a bunch of con men trying to grift and find a way to make as much money as they can out of people that they know they can take advantage of. So it kind of just grew in that sense, where this is kind of basically what the modern day con man is. You know, you'd have cult leaders back in the day, you have a snake oil salesman back in the day, but now you have these guys online presenting themselves in a certain way in order to not only boost their own self-esteem and get their own validation, but clearly exploit these guys financially so that they can, you know, succeed in their own twisted pathway that they've kind of forged for themselves, thinking that's their kind of pathway to success.
And in the role of Anthony, Russell Tovey gives such a layered performance. He's charismatic enough that you understand why people follow him, even as those cracks start appearing. So, what were your conversations like with Russell as you worked together to build the balance and develop this character?
I think I just kind of knew that he would be able to do. I saw him do Angels in America, and I saw him do a film called The Pass, where he plays a football player, which I think is a very similar-ish performance, not quite the same. And then even recently, he did Plain Clothes, which is brilliant. And so I knew that he's had a history with certain types of characters. Well, I knew that he just fit very naturally into this, especially because, for example, Roy Cohn is a very big influence on Anthony's character. And so obviously Russell playing Joe Pitt in Angels in America is almost the kind of apprentice to Roy Cohn in the play. So in that sense, it just felt like that would be a natural progression for him in that sense. And I just knew that he'd be very good in the role. We didn't really rehearse. We had a very short conversation. He seemed to be in straight away, which was great. You know, I just reached out to his agents with a cold email offering the role. It happened very quickly. We had a couple of chats about it before we shot, but then we just when we got to the day, we just kind of went for it. And I think he kind of figured it out. And I usually just let the actors figure it out before we get there, because there's no point me, throwing a bunch of things at them. They have the script and they can figure that character out. And if they need me, they need me. But if not, I want them to kind of take it and create something and give life to that character. Because who am I to kind of get in there and tell them how to do their job as because they know what they're doing, especially with
Yeah.
that level of experience and the work they've done. I want them there for a reason. So I know they're going to bring to it what I hope they will bring to it. And he has. He's brilliant in the film.
And stylistically, the film was very interesting. Like one of the things that caught my attention, in addition to the performances, was the cinematography. Josh Carrington Birch's work. Those very long controlled shots, letting these scenes breathe. What conversations did you two have about the visual language?
We wanted it to be quite cold and quite clinical, so that was the approach. So I was thinking, well, it's weird because when you write a script, you have your references when you're writing the script, but then when you're thinking about how it's going to be visually, you have your own separate references when you're doing it visually. So when I'm writing a thing, I'm thinking this feels very David Mamet, this feels very Pinter, this is what I'm going for. It kind of makes sense that it's kind of cold and straight to the point, but obviously there's that element of masculinity and performance and the nature of a con man, which is why the David Mamet stuff kind of comes in your head somewhere as a reference point. But when you're directing it, it takes a completely different approach because I'm thinking it's going to be cold, it's going to be clinical. I'm thinking Michael Haneke, I'm thinking like Ulrich Seidel, these very Austrian filmmakers that are making very uncomfortable, cold films because they're talking about a subject that is uncomfortable and cold and observational. So we thought, okay, we are going to go internal into this character, but because everything is so constructed around him, he's created all these barriers around him. There's still going to be a coldness. So with that opening shot, he's pulling you in there, you know. So that single take in the first 5 minutes, he's kind of grabbing you and holding you in and grabbing your attention because you're kind of seeing how he works, what's his
Yeah.
process. But you also need to believe who he is, right? You need to believe he is this guy, just as a film. You need to have that suspension of disbelief there, because if that works, then you're going to believe the rest of the film. That I know who this guy is. I believe this performance. It feels like he's one of these guys that are genuinely out there in real life. Um, and then we thought, okay, well, let's just hold our takes, because if we linger on our shots, it just creates that discomfort, and it also allows the actors to be more natural within the space that they have. You know, we kept the shots clean. We didn't go over the top. We kept it quite simple in that sense. So that was the approach. It was cold. It was clinical, but we wanted to linger because we wanted to allow the actors to be natural, but also to kind of emphasize on the discomfort as well throughout it.
And I appreciate that in the production design as well, because the interview scene is just in this stark, empty,
Yeah.
white room with just the reporter, and nobody else. So, were those similar conversations with your design team, with Vito Valev, just like keep it minimal, keep it simple, keep it
Yeah, I
cold?
think the minimalism of it was. I think all my films have been quite minimalistic, though. In general, I think that must be something that I just like to do, to have the sets as minimal as possible. I think I just like that design. I don't know where that comes from. I think because everything is so dialogue centric, I'm so focused on the actors, and I don't want a lot of kind of fluff around. But also, all these environments that they're in are controlled environments. So if they're all going to be controlled environments, they all need to have a kind of starkness to them anyway, you know?
Yeah.
And you want to also keep a consistent visual style through all of them. So I think that's where that kind of came from. It just lends into the choices that we made on the, the idea of it being cold and clinical and stark and blunt to an extent, right? So that was
Yeah.
it complements that. So we just thought, well, we have a minimal production design, but we also are going to have these lingering shots. That space will evoke its own, or I guess lend to the discomfort and lend to the focus on the performances as well.
And I want to go back to what you said at the beginning. So, the self-help industry, as you said, it's become so big and so
Uh,
much of a presence. And the character of Anthony is one very specific corner of it. So I'm curious, as you were writing him and creating this character, what were some of your biggest challenges in creating someone that the audiences would understand before they began to question him?
to understand before they question. Well, I think that's kind of the point in general, right? You got to understand them in order to know what's actually going on. So we're kind of pulling the curtain behind the Wizard of Oz a little bit, aren't we, in this kind of situation? Because I mean, when I was researching, I was looking to all these guys, but I'm looking at guys like Aaron Hubbard, I'm looking at guys like Roy Cohn. They're all very similar. They all link. These are, to an extent, highbrow con men because
Right.
they're quite flashy. They're able to disguise the schemes and kind of fraudulent schemes that they're putting together. Yeah, it's not very different from like Bernie Madoff, for example, as well. These are all
Yeah.
these guys are kind of doing the same thing, just in different avenues. So I think the best thing really to do with this story in particular was, let's understand how they are the way they are, why they are the way they are,
Right.
and then in doing so, it will leave the audience thinking, well, why are these people following these people if they're just as broken as all of them? They don't have the answers to anything. It all comes from some kind of buried trauma somewhere. Now, we give one example, but it's a film, so that's just one example.
Right.
But in general, there's multiple reasons. There's multiple reasons as to why they are the way they are. There's different things, and a lot of it comes from buried trauma. That's kind of what I've seen. My deductions were researching a lot of them, that it all comes from some kind of part in their childhood, in their past. There was a documentary recently that Louis Theroux made about these guys as well that just came out on Netflix maybe a couple months ago, which was also interesting because his conclusion of that was that they all had the consistent thing between all of them was a lack of a father figure. So
Mm.
that was his deduction. But I think the deduction goes a bit further than that. I think it's a bit more generalized. they've all gone through some kind of buried trauma that they've suppressed, and in doing so, they've then had to forge a character in order to cope. And that's kind of what they've all done. And that's what Anthony's doing here.
Yeah.
He's actually completely lost himself. He doesn't know who he is anymore. His
Yeah.
identity, whoever he was, is gone because everything is about the performance, everything is about the show,
Yeah.
everything is about how he presents himself and how he's perceived. Nothing is personal. He doesn't really have a life. That is
Yeah.
his life. His life
Mhm.
is the performance. He's become the act. And that's what happens to a lot of these guys. They become the act that they present themselves to be, and then eventually they just lose whoever their own identity ever was. They just become a caricature of themselves.
And it's interesting to say that when you get lost in this. So I found the title of the film particularly fascinating. I am the prize, because that phrase in and of itself is not necessarily negative, right? Like I remember teachers telling us, similar
Yeah.
things like that we are important. It's just the way that he interprets and weaponizes it that makes it so compelling. So how did you come to that phrase? I'm wondering, for the centerpiece of all the, like, where did that come from? I'm just curious.
That's just again a lot of research into all these guys, the kind of seminars that they're running, the things that they write in their seminars, their books.
Ah,
Because I mean, I usually just do a deep dive when I have an idea. I do a deep dive. So the character in general came from a larger script that I was writing. I was writing the spec script. I was in a program in the UK called the BBC Writers Room, where the BBC will. It's like a emerging talent type thing where you'd write like a pilot episode for a TV show with them for about a year and a half. So he was a character in a larger ensemble drama. He's one of the key characters in it. I've now come out of that thinking, oh, okay, let's go turn this into a feature. So I've turned it into a feature. The feature's kind of sitting there hoping to get
ah,
made. We're hoping this out of the back of this one character that we're exploring, we can show
right.
all the other characters and also the second half of Anthony's story, because this is only the first half of his story, really, with this short. But that was all during the research process. So I kind of was doing a deep dive into all these kinds of guys, what they were saying, their seminars, the Reddit threads, YouTube videos, the books. And then you're thinking, okay, well, I need to now, I can't make a carbon copy of an Andrew Tate or Jordan Peterson. But what
Right.
I can do is pick bits and pieces of all these different sources and mold my own character. And in doing so, hopefully he's believable enough that we will be able to genuinely believe that he could coexist with the Andrew Tates and the Jordan Petersons and all the other random ones that somehow pop out the woodwork, right? So I
Yeah.
think that was the intention of it.
And as you look back on making I Am the Prize and thinking about the feature and your next project, was there anything particular that stood out to you making this that, represented a practice or something you look forward to taking into a future project? And on the flip side of that, was there a learning curve during production that changed how you'll approach things moving forward?
It's always difficult with shorts, though, I think, because you're working on limited time and limited money. You never have the enough money to make the film, and you never have enough time to make the film. So it's always going to be a trial by fire every time you make one. Because I guess it's also with indie films in general, just hard to get made. And when you do get the opportunity to make them, you're under a lot of pressure to get things done within a certain time and within a certain amount of money. So it's always the same learning curve with more days and more money. And even that might not feel like enough later down the line, right? So I think it's really just being as disciplined as possible and being able to cut things out when you know you need to cut things out, or add things in when you know you need to add things in. It's always it's never really determinable. It's always going to change and shift and flow in different directions all the time. So it's always just about being, I always think hope for the best but prepare for the worst. And I think that's the best way to go about things. So I usually just prepare, but I'm always ready for shit to hit the fan at some point. Because that happened on set. That happened on this set as well. Because okay, so to break the ice, just because of scheduling and all the difficulties of scheduling, first first day, first half of the day was the sex scene. So
Oh,
that's how we opened. That's how we opened our production, and then I think the second day, second half of the day was the interview scene. Now during the interview scene, this was probably the hardest point because it was the end of the day. It was our final scene. It's obviously the climax of the film, so it's arguably the most important scene. But during that, there's a rainstorm. So the rainstorm is going. The sound guy is like, no, this is not going to work. I think it might be Martin Ellis. he was saying that the sound's not great. We have to wait for the rain to stop. So we had to stop and start every time the rainstorm would stop and start.
Oh,
And we had like what, maybe a couple hours to shoot that whole scene. And
right.
then after that, during that actually, there were two birds, two seagulls mating on the roof. So you could hear the seagulls mating on the roof. Then you're hearing the rainstorm. But now we're like, okay, we have to wait for the seagulls to stop, doing their thing. Then we got to stop for the rainstorm, and then we got to start shooting again. And then when the seagulls start again and the rainstorm starts again, then we have to stop and start and stop and start. So things like that. I mean, we got there in the end, right? So we got
Yeah,
the coverage that we needed. We shot the scene, I think, fairly well. But that's just the reality of it. You're having
yeah,
to make that all work in time, and we're timing when seagulls are mating and when the rainstorm stops. That's just the part. That's just the reality of filmmaking, I think.
yeah. And one last question before I have to let you go. When audiences leave, I am the prize. What's one idea or feeling you hope stays with them after the credits roll?
I think just opening up that conversation. I don't think there's a lot of transparency as to what's actually going on. So I think the great thing about what adolescence does is that they shine a light into what's actually an introduction into what this is and who's being influenced. You're seeing the kids that are being influenced by this, but we haven't actually seen the influences. We haven't seen the root cause of the issue. So what this is kind of finding the root cause of the issue, trying to tackle that head on. That's kind of the point of these characters and what we're trying to explore with Anthony here, and also just to show that even though we see these guys as caricatures on the internet, we need to look a bit deeper to see how broken they actually are. And by doing so, you realize that they're just as kind of sad and pathetic and engulfed in their own hubris, really, as anybody else. And hopefully, that would make all those young men that would potentially be interested in them no longer interested, no longer entertaining these guys who are just con men, but they're just also very emotionally broken to have to go down that avenue in order to con people. It's not like I'm selling you, um, I don't know, a religion to follow or a index fund like a Bernie Madoff, for example. This guy's telling you how to live your life in order to boost your own self esteem, but it's all just a bunch of rubbish. So, how broken do you have to be to do that? That's kind of what we're trying to explore with this character in particular. And I think it's been going well in terms of the reception. People kind of understanding that it's good to look into these people, and even though it's an uncomfortable watch and it's a hard watch because it's not a likable character at all. I don't think anyone likes the character,
Yeah.
but you don't have to like the character. I don't believe that you need to like your protagonists. You just need to understand them and where they've come from, and in doing so, hopefully we can boost that awareness a little bit in terms of what's going on, who are these people, and how can we stop entertaining them. That's kind of the point of the story overall, I think.
Fascinating thing to think about. Well, Sai, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I enjoyed our conversation. For those watching, I Am the Prize is continuing its festival run at HollyShorts in Los Angeles. I will include information on how to get tickets in the notes below, as well as social media information on the film and the team. If you have the opportunity to check it out, this is definitely an interesting one to see. If you enjoyed today's interview and this conversation, please remember to subscribe and like the video, subscribe to the channel, and you can check out my website, cinephilemike.com, for more exclusive cinematic content, interviews, spoiler-free reviews, and all the stuff you love. But until then, it's the Cinephile Mike saying take a break and watch something new. Sai, have an amazing day.
Oh, thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Thank you.